Okay. I made this video to explain what my process was to figure out, these things, um, for the NHL 95 formats. I think the first thing is that I'm also relying on my knowledge from, whatever I remembered from like, you know, 1997 to, you know, the year 2000 or whenever I was modding NHL 95, like the stuff I knew around palettes and extracting and importing rinks came in useful, at least initially. Um, but okay, so the first thing I did was uh, I guess I was going into NHL info, and that's the key is that I've been everything I did it necessarily wasn't from scratch. I've been standing on the shoulders of like the work that Tony Weiland did, the work that Anton I think his name is Anton Julien that he did. I think uh, I for some reason I vaguely remembered that there was a version of NHL Info that you could see the sprites. Maybe this is something me imagining things, or maybe it was true. But in any event, so this is one of the files. So what I ended up doing, and I don't know if I still have the sample, um, is I noticed the Canadian flag. Let's see if I have C flag in here. Yeah, so I noticed that I was looking at it and I was like, hey, maybe if I apply palette, maybe this looks like something. Because it kind of looks like something. It looks scrambled. So let me see if I actually have that image, which I would have in here somewhere. Yeah, so right there. So let's see if I can open one of these up. So I was like, hey, this looks like something. This looks like the Canadian flag, right? And then I had a screenshot of the actual game, which I don't know if I've kept the screenshot from the game. I hadn't, but I basically did a comparison. I'm like, these look similar. Like there's something wrong here, clearly. Like I think like so there's like the dots, which is like the dot matrix effect. Um, in the game. But then on the other rows, there would be like a full line of like just a solid color, and no dot matrix effects. Look, every other line had like the dot matrix effect. So I was like, is there some sort of image compression going on? And these colored dots are being read wrong as color information, but there's some compression going on, right? So that was kind of like in my head, right? And so the next thing I figured out, um, so I mean, I eventually before I actually tried to extract the graphics data, um, I used a hex editor. This one I like a lot, HXD. Like I'm not a big hex editor, but this has come in. I don't know. I like the usability on this one. Um, so I went into the file and I was like, oh, hey, so like the names of the sprites are all here, right? And then if you open something like C flag, let's see, C flag, and hey, C flag, like you can see the name 012, right? So I was like, well, if I just copy this over C flag and like start the game, like what happens, right? I was wondering, right? And so Um, probably have a capture of this somewhere. Uh, it looks something like this, right? Um, right here, right? So I was like, okay, that's interesting. Initially, though, it wasn't those colors. I don't know if I have a capture of what the original colors I was seeing. Let me see if I can find one. I probably don't. Oh, maybe in here. No, I don't. Okay. So, but originally, it was coming out with weirder colors, I think. And so I had already created a palette on the home and away team. Um, and my thought, because my initial plan was maybe I just capture the sprites from gameplay, right? Which is a really, really painful process to like trigger all of the frames of animation. But that's what I was thinking. And I went into Jed and the Jersey editor program that you can edit the palettes. And I tried to basically give every individual um, pixel or like color zone on the jersey a different color. The problem was even though the sprite, which I now know, is actually stored in 256 colors, which I didn't know. Like I wasn't sure what format is stored in. Its sprite is stored in 256 colors. The color palette that NHL 95 uses only has 64 colors, right? So and the problem is that there's something like 75 color zones on a sprite, something like that. Like I don't actually haven't I can figure it out what it is, but I haven't fully figured it out yet. But it's like basically, so I ended up being short by 4 pixels, right? So if you think about it, there's like I think there is 64 colors, plus the four that I was missing, so that's 68. Plus, there's like 3 skin tone colors, I think. 3 or 4 skin tone colors. I think there's 4 skin tone colors, right? So that is 68, that's 72. Plus, there is the equipment color, right? So that's 73. Plus, there's the skate blade color. So that's 74. Um, You know what? This is interesting. I didn't notice this. Looks like there's two skateboard colors. I didn't know that. Huh. Okay, so that's what, 75? Or wait. So it was like let's do that again. So 64 plus 68 or plus 4 is 68 plus another 4 and one of these is the same as the stick color. 68, so that's 72. Plus the skate 73 plus the 2 skate colors, so that's 75 plus the shadow is 76 plus like I think there's a bug, but on some of these shadows there's also an extra color, so what, that's 76. So there's 76 color zones on this guy, um, and you obviously can't color um, the stick, the equipment. Like you can't color that. You can just color on the actual uniform. So yeah. Anyways, I was like that was my ripping process. But because of that, I ended up coming up. I guess the what ends up being displayed here is in the palette. It would display it using the palette, the unmapped palette, like the palette that's actually stored at the sprite level, right? So I can actually let me open this in Photoshop and maybe I can explain that. Yeah, let's do that. Oh, this video is getting long, longer than I honestly I didn't know how long this video is going to be, but I feel like this is it's going to be a long video. Okay. Um, so yeah, so the palette, and so this is something I was aware of, back then. So this palette actually is similar, I think, to the rink. So this is the game palette, right? And so I want to say like the start of the palette here is actually very similar to the rink palette. And I tend to actually break this down and figure out, okay, what part of this is the rink palette? What is team one? What is team two? I have a feeling that team one and team two colors are actually dynamic. Because when I applied this palette, which used all 64 colors to both teams, the second team, it wouldn't, the crest would start getting garbage in the colors, right? So it's almost like there wasn't enough space for all of the colors. Um, so in any event, the thing though is that the sprite palette, so let's say the Florida Panthers. Let me zoom in a little bit so we can see this. So we can see where these team palettes actually sit. So okay, that's an equipment palette, the helmet. Skin tone, that's part of the game palette, and I think part of the ring palette. Okay, so now we're getting into the home team palette. So yeah, so home team palette. So in this area, like here to here is the home team palette, and then the road team palette. Right, so the road team palette is probably like here to there. I think these last four are also part of the ring palette. Um, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, see up here. Yeah, so let's see. Yeah, so like these two rows at the very least. These three rows are like the away team palette, and 3.5 rows, I think, and there's 3.5 rows above that are the home team palette. Um, so yeah, so I was like, what I noticed is I was checking to make sure that all of the color zones were there, um, and they weren't. Uh, and I figured that out by basically just like creating an indexed. Like I took a bunch of the sprites and tried to create like an indexed color version and compared it to uh, the in-game. So I guess is the I would term this like the ripped version of the sprite versus the in-game version of the sprite, and I just compare them like what happens, how many colors do I have when I go to index color mode, and so for example 52, right? That seems like it might just be the sprite. So if you put like enough of the stitch of the knife of the sprites together, then you'll get a full picture. And so I think eventually I found out, hey, or if you compare like for like, right? The same sprite, the in-game version of it versus this, does it have the same colors? And I was finding no, like this version was having less colors, and I'm like, that's gonna be a pain in the ass. Maybe I'm gonna have to rip the sprite multiple times with multiple different palettes. Maybe I'm gonna have to create a custom rink palette, which was possible, I think. So that's something I was thinking about. But then I was like, you know what? Let me look at the actual sprite data. So I had ripped a bunch of these sprites manually already, using this methodology. Um, oh, and the one thing I figured out as well that was important was that this is really important. This was the thing that first cracked it, right? Was that when I went to grayscale. So the problem is, if I keep it like this, and I start copying the sprite around, I will lose the color information because once you copy it and paste it from index color to an RGB document or to another index color document, it's going to treat, even though you might have different sprites or different pixels, different color zones, physically different color zones, but they might be using the same color. So it will just treat it as the same color. But what I found is initially I wasn't sure if it was using um, what palette it was using. But then the thing that I found quickly was that when I grayscaled it, um, it was actually using the stored sprite palette. And I don't. This is not a good example, but the example was the player with the crest. So let me actually I'll just open the extracted version. So it'll give you an idea of what I found. So let's see. So like around like 360 something. Yeah, so like one of these. So when I'd rip it from the game and I put it in grayscale, it looks something like this, right? Um, Other than the background color was different because it was taking that color that I customized the rink to. Um, but any event, like what I quickly found was, hey, look, all of the crest is aligned in this bottom left corner, which is exactly like how NHL 96 does it. And then I was looking through, right, and I was like, and I compared once I had it in grayscale, and then I took the color. So in fact, you know what, I can do that with this guy. So I can show you. So and it's important that this grayscale is different. This does not like keep the color information, right? That discards it and makes it um, uh, a grayscale based on the colors in the image, but what you want is a grayscale where it just replaces the palette with unique colors, where every color in the palette is a unique color. And so the thing you can do is you can say, hey, I want to take this, make this a new image. Um, let's see if this was a good example or not. But let's take this to indexed. 53 colors. Okay, so in this example, it actually, I think, ended up being the same amount of colors. Um, oh, 52. So yeah, one color was missing, right? So as I did that experiment, I figured out, okay, so like I can start ripping these sprites this way, and I had a methodology with DOSBox and save states and like a tool called Screen Thief to do it. Um, so that was a whole big preamble to like, oh, and so the one part I missed was that so the one thing about I realized with C flag is like, oh well, what I can do is I can rename this guy to like 1 and this guy to 2 and this guy to 3 and then just rename these to 4 5 6 or whatever it was 0 1 2 and rename the other ones to 4 5 6 5 6 and then stick it into uh, NHL 95 as the C flag file, and like it would display the next sprites. So I knew, oh great, now I know how to display all the sprites. So I was doing that method. Oh, and then I guess the other thing I should add is then what has been a useful tool. Once I figured that out, ChatGPT, like to write the code. Like I have been a developer. I'm a manager now. I haven't been doing as much coding. But let's see, I probably had a conversation with ChatGPT. Yeah, this is it. Right. So I said, hey, there's a set of files with 1150 sprites for video game. Each file has 50 sprites in it. First file contains sprites 0 to 49. So I explained the whole situation, right? Um, and I asked it to create me a node application, which takes the sprite name as input, copies the file that contains the sprite to UFlag. And so over the course of experimenting, I figured out that UFlag has 4 frames instead of 3, so it's better to use. And so then proceeds to rename the input sprite name UFlag to 000, the frame following to 1 to 3, and the rest of the sprites would need to be ranged from 0 to 49. And I think there was like some weird problem with the code that I had to fix, but it created it. I think. Um, oh yeah, there was something about the header data that was wrong. So it's not perfect. Um, I think I asked it to create the code a few times, and what I found was I think maybe the first version was the closest, and I had to make some adjustments because like stuff around like the header size and stuff wasn't right. So again, I was using that method, and then I decided, look, I know with GFX pack, I can actually extract as data, like not as an image, because as an image, who knows what's happening in the conversion process, but GFX pack has a mode to extract as data, right? So I wanted to extract the raw image file, not trying to convert it to an image, but just what the raw file is. And I was like, look, I already have the sprite data, and the other thing is I knew the dimensions that I was supposed to cut these images to based on NHL info. So if I go to this guy, oops, I don't know if I messed up my recording now. Okay, yeah, that was not the right one. Let me just check if my recording it says it's still recording. So if it doesn't, I'll be sad. Um, oh, it's doing it again. Okay, I don't know why it's not opening the PPV file properly. But in any event, like when you go into the PPV file, it shows you the, oh, maybe it's because I'm editing it, but it shows you the dimensions of each sprite. So I knew how to cut it. I could save it to a raw image file, and then I could compare the two, right? So let me see if I have. Yeah, okay, so this is where I actually figured it out, right? Oh, okay, actually, maybe. Hmm. I think so. So this is the file that I extracted via GFX pack. And then I think I created a raw, I guess this is now the one that I used generated from the script, but essentially, um, yeah, I don't know if I have yeah, okay, so this is the GFX pack one, and then this would be, so what I did is I took the sprite that I had ripped. And the other thing I knew from my days back in editing NHL 95 stuff, I knew FF um, was the byte that represented transparency, which is 255, right? And so that's the other thing to keep in mind is that in the file as like a raw image as raw image data, these are represented in like 2 bytes, right? So the first one, which is 000, it's represented as 00, right? This next one would be represented as 01. 8 would be represented as 08. 9 would be represented as OA, I believe, or is it I'm messing up. 09, and then 10 would be OA, right? And then so it would be in hex, right? So 255 is FF, right? So it's here FFF, but it'd just be FF, right? Because it's since it's grayscale, they don't need RGB, they just need one to represent the color intensity for grayscale. Okay, so now going back to the hex, right? So yeah, so I created a raw file and I compared it to the file I extracted from GFX pack because at this point I'm like, oh man, it's gonna take forever for me to like. I mean, I was gonna do it in like a couple of weeks, but it's gonna take me forever to extract these sprites. Okay, so this is the wrong raw file, I think. Because this looks like a compressed file. Yeah, let me see if I can find the right raw file. Is it that one? Yes. Okay. So this is actually a generated one, though this is my V1 of generating the file. But essentially, when I exported it from Photoshop, the file looks something like this. And what's funny is I could actually see the shape of the player in this. But then I was looking like, do I see the same stuff? Anything that looks recognizable? Because I was thinking maybe there's a way where they indicate, hey, there's repeated bits in here and just repeat. And so I'm looking at the files. Okay, so this stuff looks different up here, but the one thing I found was this upside down question mark 3434. Upside down question mark 3434. At that point, like, I got something, right? This is not a coincidence. The BF, BF, BE, BF, BF, BE, right? So I was looking at this and I was like, okay, there it says 6 and then FF. And then I looked at this side and it's like, oh my God, there's FF 6 times. So this bit must say, hey, multiply this 6 times, and then, or multiply the next byte 6 times, and that's what it is. So it's FFFF, but now it's BF, So then I was writing this down, right? Like a comparison on both sides, and there's like FE is FD, unknown byte, but then it's BF, and then it's OA, which is 10, right? And then FF. And then we've got 10 FFs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then we've got FF 88, which I also didn't understand. Like I started to understand, okay, there's descriptor byte, and then there's something like whatever, how many ever bytes needs to write, right? FF 88. So I'm not sure what that FF was about, but then there's 88, and then there's 1. So it's repeat FF 1 time, boom, and then 4, and then BF, and then we've got BF 4 times. So like I knew we had something here, right? And so then eventually what I figured out was FD, so what it represents is 253. So what the formula was, it was like 256 minus 253 is 3. And that means that if so basically what I figured out is if the value is greater than 127 or 128, right? I don't know what the exact one is. I don't think I needed to figure out because all of the sprites came out fine. I think I picked 128 as the value where it switches over. But for if the value is over 128, it means that 256 minus that value, that's the next number of bytes that you just need to output as is from the file. Whereas if it's below 127, it's multiply this next byte X amount of times. And then I went to ChatGPT and I was like, hey, write me a script, and it kind of did it. And I think there was some, I don't know if there were some issues with it. Um, oh, the skewed image, right? And then I figured luckily as I modified the code that ChatGPT gave me to output it as a BMP to also output it as a raw, right? Because I was already looking at it in a raw format, and in raw it looked perfect. This was the code, the output for raw. But BMP, some of them had issues. Um, and it was only the sprites from NHL 95. And what I found was that uh, in NHL 94, they made sure the width of all of the sprites was multiple of 4. And there was a good reason for that because back in those days, it was for optimization purposes. They kept the width of the images to multiples of 4, which like in the console games, you see that as well, right? Um, and so on the BMPs in NHL 95, they didn't adhere to that anymore, or the sprites they didn't adhere to that anymore. Um, and so those sprites would end up skewed. And I found that with BMP, there's a special way to handle sprites that are not a multiple of 4, that you have to add a little bit of padding into the image data. So that's how I figured out that.